There we are. Trump triumph shocks the world. Couldn't put it better myself. Yes, the free world, what is known as the free world, finally has a new leader. Donald J. Trump, the 45th President of the United States of America. And what a shock it was. I was quite amused to see the comment of Andrew Neil, who was quite a perceptive television journalist in Britain. And he said the following: once again, we got it wrong. Once again, the polls were mistaken. Once again, the outsider won. And of course, this is perfectly true. It was not foreseen by the bourgeois analysts. In fact, the polls, right up until the beginning of the polling, all of the polls indicated that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and win comfortably, in fact. And what a turnaround. Colossal turnaround, involving a number of states which have always been traditionally anyway, Democrats, such as Ohio, Wisconsin, Michigan, working class states, incidentally, the traditionally Democratic, as I've said, suddenly shifted to the Republicans, or more correctly, not the Republicans, they shifted to Donald Trump. Now, how does one explain this? I saw the usual tearful reaction of some of these horrible bourgeois, liberal, young things, young professionals, journalists and so on, weeping into their, whatever they weep into. And of course, the message that comes across from these people is perfectly obvious. They blame the American people. They blame the American public that they're racist, that they're reactionaries, that they're crazy, that they're ignorant and so on. Of course, they blame the working class in particular. And of course, this is entirely wrong. What is true is that none of these people understood the real process is taking place in America, and that goes for other countries also. It was the same in Britain, if you remember, over the question of the referendum on EU membership, on Brexit. And of course, you could argue, and you'd have a point, that there was a reactionary element in that it was people like Farage and so on are racist. That's all perfectly true. Yes, but you couldn't argue that millions of people in Britain are racists and proto-fascists, or whatever you might care to say. The real reason for that was it was a kind of gut instinct revolt against the status quo. In the case of Britain, against the political elite in Westminster, this Westminster bubble, including both Tories and right-wing Labour, by the way, and the Parliamentary Labour Party, who, of course, you couldn't distinguish between them. And these people, of course, in Westminster, these comfortably off middle-class lawyers and all the rest of it, have, in effect, a contempt for ordinary people. They don't even consider the working class or the problems of the unemployed in the northeast, the mining areas that were slaughtered by Thatcher and which have never recovered, and which have gained nothing from membership in the EU, for example. Now in America you have exactly the same phenomenon. I think Trump himself described it as Brexit times 10 or times 100 or whatever he might have said. He said a lot of things. But clearly the same process is at work. And it's a process which the political elite on both sides of the Atlantic have failed to understand. People say that it's an earthquake, it's seismic, and I think that's a fair comment, it's a fair judgment. And indeed, the analogy with earthquakes, with geology, is quite exact, it's quite instructive. Because you have the same process taking place. For example, beneath the apparent solid surface of the earth, we know that there's seething amounts of molten rock at extraordinary temperatures, extraordinary pressures. This seething mass is seeking a way out through the Earth's crust, and eventually a way out is found in the form of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Well, you have the same in society. Beneath the apparently tranquil, still surface, you know the argument, nothing happens, nothing's happening here, everything is normal here. In the States, that was the argument. In Britain also it was the argument. It's entirely false. Beneath the apparently tranquil surface, in all these countries, in all countries in the world, I would maintain, there is a seething indignation, anger, frustration, rage against the existing order of things. Perfectly understandable. And this process dialectically, if you know anything about Marxist philosophy, dialectics, builds up until it reaches a critical point where it finally explodes one way or another. And this process, of course, is invisible to people who don't understand dialectics and who don't know anything about the working class. Hillary Clinton, this wretched creature, this creature of Wall Street, this creature of the American, this personification of everything that American people hate, of the establishment, of the elite. It's even a dynasty. They talk about political dynasties. The Bush family, the Clinton family, who between them have run America for how long? A quarter of a century, without producing any change, any beneficial change anyway, as far as the mass of people were concerned. This creature, Hillary Clinton, actually said, if Donald Trump were to win the election, which she didn't think for a moment would be the case, none of them did. But she said, if Trump wins, I would no longer recognize this country. Well, he did win, and the fact of the matter is, Mrs. Clinton, you never recognized that country. You never had any knowledge of that country, not the real America, not the America of millions of unemployed workers and poor people. You've got no knowledge of this. You're in a different planet, as far as most people are concerned. And this is really the cause of your electoral catastrophe. And this needs to be examined a little bit more closely. Now, in the same edition of the Standard that I just showed you, I'm just interested, there's one interesting interview, if I can find it. Yes, here we are. It's an interview with a Trump supporter, a chap by the name of John Fredericks, the chairman of the Virginia Donald Trump for President campaign. And this man says the following. It's quite interesting what he says. I will read it with your permission. I'll read it to you. He says, "This is a working class revolution," he says. "Nobody saw it coming." That's true. "The elites in the media, eating their cheese and drinking their champagne, never talk to real voters." That's also true. It's true in Britain also, incidentally. "Working class Americans have been sold down the river by the establishment, by the Wall Street slavery class, and Donald Trump is their advocate." Well, I could agree with everything in that statement except the last sentence. Donald J. Trump, of course, is not the advocate of the American worker. I'm sorry to tell you. He is, of course, a property tycoon himself, a billionaire, a very wealthy man. And ultimately, he represents the same class interests as Hillary Clinton. The Republicans and Democrats represent the same class, the bankers and capitalists, who are responsible for the problems of ordinary Americans and working class Americans. You know, that was put very well by the great American writer Gore Vidal, who I greatly admire, who said the following: "Our republic, the United States, our republic has one party, the property party, with two right wings." That's a fact. And this is crucial. This explains the alarm felt by the ruling class. That's why they're so concerned about Donald Trump. You see, for generations, for over a century, the solidity of American capitalism, the most important capitalist power on earth, was based upon these two apparently solid pillars, political pillars, the Republican Party and the Democrat Party, who comfortably had an arrangement that they alternated each other. They passed power to each other for a period of, for generations actually, without any fundamental difference. The latest example, of course, was Obama. Don't forget, 8 years ago. Obama offered change. He fought an election under the slogan of change. And by God, there was a reaction from millions of people. Millions of people were energized and had illusions in this. Because, why? Because Americans are desperately seeking a change. They want a change, they demand a change. Now, what change have they received under Obama for the last 8 years? Well, none at all. Nothing that you could notice, particularly. And therefore, of course, the Democrats, Obama was supposed to be a left-wing Democrat, if you like, by betraying the hopes of the people, prepared the way for the rise of Donald Trump. There's no argument about this. Now, what you will see, not just in America, but in every country, I would say, is an extreme political instability now. You can see that. Countries that were considered to be stable. Britain was supposed to be the most politically stable country in Europe. Look at the mess they've got now. After Brexit, it's not stable at all. And what you will see in all countries is a whole period of violent swings of public opinion to the left, yes, but also to the right. Also to the right. You see this in Greece, incidentally. I noticed that New Democracy is rising because of the betrayal of Tsipras. And by the way, you have to look at this. The conduct of the reformists, which prepares the way, always prepares the way for a swing to reaction, a swing to the right. And that was the case with Obama. There's no question, no getting around this. These violent swings to the left and to the right, what do they represent? They represent a desperate search by the masses who are trying to find a way out of this crisis, out of this mess. It's a revolt, if you like, an instinctive revolt. What you see in the States, it's like a kind of plebeian insurrection. Yes, involving millions of workers. You can't blame the workers for that. Protesting against unemployment, the hopeless position of the factories that have been closed in the so-called Rust Belt, which was once a thriving industrial area, which Trump plays upon demagogically. He appeals to these people, and you can't respond. You can't criticize them or blame them for responding to that. Incidentally, many of these people, I would say most of them, would have supported Bernie Sanders. That's the point. They did support Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders was the only one that could have beaten Trump, by the way. That's the answer to these idiots in Britain and the Labour, these scoundrels in the Parliamentary Labour Party that say that, oh no, the left can't win an election. You know, they can't win an election. Well, of course, Bernie Sanders could have won in the States. He's the only one that could have beaten Trump. It's a well-known fact, by the way, that many of those that supported Trump would have been prepared to vote for Bernie Sanders. They said so. And the reason was that both Bernie Sanders on the left and Trump on the right represented somehow an attack on the existing establishment. That's the bottom line in this situation. And therefore this will be repeated. Now, Trump, of course, is a right-winger. There's no question about that. He's not the champion of the working class. That's just nonsense. And this will be seen in practice. But he has benefited from this enormous feeling of rage, of opposition to the status, rejection of the status quo. People are protesting against inequality, unemployment, poverty, and also the cynical rule of a tiny privileged elite of super rich people. They're even like dynasties, family. They run the United States for the last 25 years as if it were their personal private property, passing power from the Clinton dynasty to the Bush dynasty. This stinks. The whole corrupt system stinks in the nostrils of people, and they protest against it. And nobody can blame them for that. Of course, Trump does not represent a real change any more than Obama represented a change, or Clinton would have represented it. That's just nonsense, because they're all fundamentally rooted in the same class. That's the point. Now, it's true the ruling class don't like Trump. They didn't want Trump. First of all, because as a person, he's a maverick, he's unpredictable. They don't like people like that. They prefer someone firmly under their control, a puppet like Clinton would have been, a puppet. He's a maverick, and therefore they don't like that. But it's also because of the forces that he's conjured up, the forces that he's appealed to, the millions, precisely, of workers and dispossessed, disenchanted people that are responding. And therefore that's a dangerous thing to do from their point of view. Nevertheless, of course, they were shocked. The shock, of course, in the Democrats, who completely demoralized, I don't doubt it. But also in the Republicans. Don't forget that the Republican establishment didn't want Trump. And at least you give Trump credit for something. He was defiant. He defied the Republican establishment all the way along the line. If Bernie Sanders had a similar firm attitude in relation to the Democrat Party, I think we'd be in a different position now. We'd be in a strong position. Particularly as Trump will become, I think, fairly quickly, he'll become discredited in the eyes of his supporters. The ruling class, of course, have got 1,000 means of controlling politicians like Trump, and they will control him. Now, on paper, Trump is the most powerful man in America. The Republicans, Trump in effect, not only now control the White House, they also control the House of Representatives and the Senate. This is an apparently powerful position. Yes, but he's aroused a lot of illusions, you see, a lot of hopes. And therefore now he will find out very quickly he's got to deliver. He's got no excuse. Can't blame the opposition or blocking of his measures by Congress, because he controls Congress. Or the Republicans control Congress. And therefore he'll be under pressure to carry out things which he cannot deliver on. He can't solve the problems of ruined industries and unemployment and inequality, which are the product of the capitalist system which he supports. He's a fervent supporter. He's a businessman. In effect, he's a salesman, Donald, a very capable salesman, talented salesman. It's true. And he sold the American public. He sold the working class a beautiful dream, you know. But in reality, it's a shoddy product. He sold them a product which is not fit for purpose. And when people realize that, it will take a little time, of course. But when they realize that, you better look out. It'll prepare the way, I predict now, it'll prepare the way, Donald Trump will prepare the way for a colossal shift to the left in the future. There's no question about that. Now, you see, the international repercussions are also quite interesting. Normally, when an American president a candidate is elected president, they fall over themselves to greet him and to send letters of congratulations and so on. This time, I was quite amused. There was a deafening silence from Paris and from Berlin and from Rome. Deafening silence, only broken by Marine Le Pen, interestingly enough, who sent him a congratulation 3 hours before the result was announced. That was a clever move. And of course, the initial impact of this internationally will be to strengthen the kind of reactionary populist leaders, anti-immigration, the anti-immigration crowd such as Le Pen in France and Geert Wilders in Holland, who's also congratulated Donald Trump. And the only other person that congratulated him fairly quickly, of course, was Vladimir Putin. They must have run out of vodka in Moscow this morning when they heard the news. They're delighted, of course, because Trump has made noises that he wants to deal with Russia and so on. Well, we will see. We will see if that transpires or not, because Putin, by the way, made an interesting statement. He's not a very nice man, but he's quite clever, Putin, I think, in his own narrow way. He said to Washington, he said to the new president, to Trump, we would like a deal with you that defends the interests of both our great nations. Unfortunately, of course, the interests of Russia and America are not necessarily the same. And therefore, it remains to be seen whether they will do a deal or not. It's possible they might, I don't know. That's Trump's idea. We'll see if it works out in practice. Either way, you can bet your bottom dollar that the Russians, that Putin will take advantage of the present crisis in America, because there's a crisis, the confused situation that exists, the contradictions that exist, to press his own agenda. The Russians will go on the offensive for the next few months. As we say in English, they'll make hay while the sun shines. That's perfectly clear. Oh, the other person that also sent a message fairly early on, the Germans didn't. Well, Merkel made a very grudging kind of statement, formal statement of approval. But the German foreign minister, I was astonished, before she'd said a word, actually told somebody, actually said, it was reported in the press, that, what did he say? Oh yes, that this candidate, that Trump, was not the preferred candidate either of the German government or of the big majority of the German people, which is true. I think he's got about 5% support in Germany. But it's not the Germans that elect the American president, it's the American people, unfortunately, that do that. The other person that rushed to give her support was Theresa May, our dear Tory Prime Minister, who, of course, immediately sent a letter hoping that this would mean a continuation of the special relationship between Britain and America. We know what that is. It's the relationship between the butler and his master. But nevertheless, maintain the special relationship. Oh, and I hope, of course, we'll get a trade deal, a nice, juicy trade deal as soon as possible, which may or may not materialize. I mean, Trump might be fond of Brexit and fond of the Tories and so on, but as I say, he's a hard-headed businessman, and his slogan is, America first, my friends. America first. Protectionism. Any trade deal that he signs, whether it is with Britain or with Timbuktu, will be on the basis of America first, of defending American interests. That's to say, the interests of American big business, the bankers and the capitalists, which is basically his interest. Of course, this fact, it's another subject we don't have time to deal with, but his economic program is based fundamentally on protectionism and isolationism. Of course, that's a threat, that's a serious threat. It's alarmed, seriously alarmed, the entire bourgeoisie on a world scale, because it's a threat to the entire capitalist world order, which is based on globalization and increased trade between the nations. And protectionism is a direct threat to that, which could, if he persists in this, which he may well persist in it, because there's a tradition in America of this kind of protectionism and isolationism. If he persists in this, it could really bring the whole of the world economic order crashing down. That's the reason for the alarm. Because although the governments were very slow in coming forward with their statements on the elections, the markets were not. The markets don't wait for any man or any government. They immediately voted with their feet. In Asia, the stock markets crashed. In Europe, there were serious falls on the stock markets, partially recovered since. And there's been a flight from the stock exchange, from stocks and shares, from investment into safe havens such as gold. So now's the time to buy gold if you're looking for a good investment. Gold, Japanese yen, and the Swiss franc. Those are supposed to be safe havens, which indicates what? It indicates the profound fears of the capitalists for the future, which is the future on a world scale, a stormy future of crisis, of slumps, of wars, of crises, of permanent political crisis and turbulence, of which what you've seen in America is just, if you like, the first act. Somebody said it's the end of a chapter in the States. I say it's the beginning, not just of a chapter, but of a whole volume of crisis, both in America and on a world scale. What you've seen at the present time in America is nothing compared to what the future holds. So, watch this space.